Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to AlMaghrib's YouTube channel. Faith While Black is the series. Make sure that you turn on your notifications and subscribe so that you don't miss an episode.
Alhamdulillah, salatu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam kathira. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. I am super happy and excited to have my brother, Ustadh Ubaydullah Evans, with me, Chicago's finest. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How you doing?
I am, alhamdulillah ala kulli hal. We praise Allah in all situations. But I have to disavow completely the title of being Chicago's finest. But I am a proud resident of that city. MashaAllah. And I'm very happy to be with my beloved brother, Ustadh Ammar AlShukry, MashaAllah, and the Maghrib Foundation as well. MashaAllah.
The whole AlMaghrib Institute fam. So I met you in you know, it's funny, like I usually don't remember when I meet people, but I remember when I met you. I met you in Columbia, Missouri.
Wow.
It was a conference in Columbia, Missouri. And you know, Mizzou is it's the oldest journalism school in the country, and you are it was my first experience with Dapper, just impeccably dressed, mashallah, with the suit, with the matching handkerchief, with the matching tie. So anyway, mashallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless.
No, wallahi, so, the beauty is in your eye, man. The beauty is in your eye.
Allah barik feek. Allah barik feek. So you are the scholar in residence of Alln, and tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey to seeking knowledge.
Bismillah. I converted to Islam when I was about 16. And, you know, I think I always...
This is in Chicago.
This is in Chicago. I converted to Islam in Chicago at the age of 16. And I always had an interest in reading. I always had an interest in studying. I always had an interest in theology. I always had an interest in philosophy. And I was very pleased to learn that the Muslims were in possession of this ancient intellectual tradition. And I had friends that had studied some formal Islamic, had taken some formal courses of study in Syria, in Morocco, in Saudi. And I initially began studying locally. We have a local Azhari Sheikh here in Chicago, Muhammad Imam.
Is he Egyptian?
Yes, he's from Alexandria.
He's
Alexandrian. And he is Azhari min Ayyam al-Azhar, from the days of the Azhar. You know, so old school Azhari. I kind of cut my teeth studying Arabic with him and doing some tahfidh al-Quran with him, doing some memorization with him. Then I enrolled at the Institute of Islamic Education, which is outside, about 35 minutes outside Chicago in Elgin, Illinois.
Okay.
I was a boarding student there for about 2 years. That school was led by some Deobandi ulama, Maulana Abdullah Salim. And it was an opportunity for me to get some Quranic immersion. I also did some, Hanafi law there. And I did just a little bit of Arabic there as well. And then I moved to Yemen because I wanted some Arabic immersion. So I did Arabic in Hadramaut. And then after that, alhamdulillah. And then after that, I enrolled at Al-Azhar. And I finished the program, the Sharia program at Azhar in the year 2012. Immediately upon graduating, I took a position with Alln, which is very charitably titled scholar in residence. I don't consider myself min fuhul al-ulama or muhaqqiqeen, but I do enjoy helping young people, especially, connect with the tradition in a way that is empowering and edifying. But I don't, I don't make any claim as to my own, rusukh, rootedness in knowledge,
So a couple of different things. Already you've taken us on a journey throughout Chicago and in some amazing places in the world. So you kind of, as soon as you got a taste, you kind of just jumped in full force.
Well, I mean, I'm condensing the story in the interest of time. It wasn't like I jumped in full force. I mean, I converted to Islam, and then there was a period of, well, I'm Muslim, but I wasn't really practicing. And
I
then,
see.
you know, someone gave me.
So these were part-time endeavors?
No, well, the first full-time endeavor was the school in Alln, the Institute of Islamic Education. I was a boarding student there. That was the first time I jumped in, and I was like 10 toes down.
Yeah.
This is what I'm doing. I'm studying Islam. And then from there, you know, Yemen was also full-time, and then Azhar was also full-time.
What was Yemen like? You going from Chicago straight to Yemen, straight to Hadramaut.
That was a huge culture shock.
I mean, it doesn't get bigger. It's not like you went from the US to the UAE or to Saudi Arabia or even to Egypt.
And you know, but what the odd thing about it was that I was flying Emirates, and I had I had an overnight layover in Dubai. Yeah,
like a last minute, do you still want to do this type of thing?
Right. So I flew from, and my flight was, in retrospect, it was a rough flight plan, but I flew from Chicago to New York.
Yeah.
From New York to Dubai. Overnight layover from Dubai to Sana'a.
Yeah.
Right. So when I got to Dubai, and I had an overnight layover, so there was a shuttle, picked us up, took us to a very luxurious, sumptuous hotel, and I thought, well, this isn't that different than America. You know what I mean? In fact, in many ways, this is much more modern than America, right?
Yeah.
And then we landed in Yemen, and the airport was, you know, very small, and it was, you know, if you are, you know, and immediately upon landing, I thought, subhanAllah, if you're a Yemeni, it's like you lost the geological lottery. You know, it's like you have all of this oil wealth.
Yeah.
And Yemen has reserves, but not nearly the size of the Qatari reserves or the Emirati reserves or the Saudi, you know, reserves. So it's like, if you're Yemeni, you live with this like, man, I guess it just didn't, you know, it just wasn't,
They have the dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the praise of the Prophet, so they're good to go.
Of course,
but
the ruh of the Rahman, the nafas of the Rahman, min jihat al-Yemen.
I have never. Something about Yemen is that I've never. I mean, I grew up with a lot of Yemenis in New York. They have. So far, I've never met a Yemeni that I didn't like. I keep telling them that. I keep telling them so far. Alhamdulillah, I've never met a lot of different peoples. I could, you know, I can't make that claim about, but people of Yemen.
No, alhamdulillah, and I wanted to speak to that. I mean, you know, I think it would be a disservice to Yemen and the people of Yemen to just talk about the underdevelopment, you know, materially, in terms of, you know, practicing a beautiful Islam and really embodying the virtues of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, hospitality, friendliness.
I already know their hospitality is probably
generosity. They were without parallel, without parallel, wallahi, without parallel.
And I don't know if you're a foodie, but what about the food over there?
They do a good job, man. You know, they do a good job. They do a good job.
Yemeni food, for me, is the best out of all of the Arabs, hands down, no comparison.
Even Lebanese?
Oh, Lebanese aren't even on my radar. They're not. I can't do Shami food, man. I can't do Palestinian or Syrian or Lebanese at all.
You might find it a little bland if you're a Sudanese.
What am I supposed to do with tabbouleh? Nah. I know you gotta, you know, you're in Chicago, you got considerations to make. But nah, man, I'm okay. I'm okay with that.
Alhamdulillah.
Some hanif. But okay, so we ended up getting to food already. So and then after that you go to Al-Azhar.
Yes, and I was in Cairo. And really, man, every place that I studied, I was fortunate to really enjoy the company of just phenomenal people, man. And I don't say that kind of as an honorific nod, or to say anything else would be kufran and ni'mah, would be ingratitude.
Yeah.
No, I just really had the good fortune of sharing the company of good people, man. Both in the States and also abroad. So I count myself very lucky, very privileged.
I mean, it is incredibly, you know, Ash-Shafi'i, he says, you know, لن تنال العلم إلا بستة. You won't achieve knowledge except with 6 things. ذكاء وحرص واجتهاد وبلغة وصحبة أستاذ وطول زمان. It says صحبة أستاذ, like having a teacher guide you the path. I mean, that's just such an incredible blessing to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. So, you had an amazing conversation recently with Dr. Sherman Jackson. And I would encourage everybody. Oh man, what I realized was that y'all were able to articulate thoughts that I had in my mind that I wasn't able to articulate up until that point, right? And so when Dr. Sherman just kind of like throws this concept out, you're like, oh, that's exactly what I've been trying to say, right? It was just, for me, it was very profound. One of the things, and I would encourage people to watch it on YouTube, it's an AlMaghrib hangout on the AlMaghrib channel, ALIM. But one of the things that you guys were negotiating and wrestling with was the topic of language as it relates to Aqidah. Being able to communicate Aqidah, our Aqidah, in the language that we use to communicate to people. And I know, you know, you being a scholar in residence and what you talked about as far as being able to communicate with young people, a lot of that battle is won and lost in the realm of language.
Of course.
So I wanted you to share your thoughts on that.
No, Bismillah. You know, I think people forget that the Quran was a linguistic miracle, and that it radically altered the language of the Arab, meaning certain social conventions, certain implicit understandings are all embodied and encoded and codified in language. When a person speaks, they are, in a sense, displaying their allegiance to a certain regime of sense, a way of understanding the world. So I find that when I'm in Egypt, just because I'm speaking Arabic, I feel like my iman is getting stronger. Even if we're just talking just conversational Arabic, because my reality is now being affirmed by, or I see more shared conceptual space between the reality that I'm articulating and the Quran. You see,
you might even just use a Quranic verse to begin a discussion or to end a discussion or end a discussion.
It's just in the language, or even like when you say, for instance, fil haqiqa, in reality, fil haqiqa, in reality, it's impossible to say that, just the locution of the words, without remembering that Allah is al-haq. So the haqiqa, the reality, is connected to the real, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas in English, a lot of times when we say in reality, we mean divorced of any metaphysical, like in reality, meaning something that does not include the metaphysical dimension. So it's all about language. Now, so much of our language is shaped by secular ideas that intentionally seek to explain the world and everything happening within the world in a language that contains no recourse to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no recourse to metaphysics, no recourse to the spiritual. This does not mean that Muslims should only speak Arabic or only speak Urdu or only speak Farsi. No. But it does mean that in the way that we consciously use this language, we have to have that internal subjectivity that comes from a connection to our aqidah, that comes from a connection to God and his messenger, And sometimes, and this is one of the things I think I struggle with, when you are in the process of trying to develop that language, trying to develop that conceptual framework, it's often very clumsy. It's not very graceful. It's not, it feels very forced.
Yeah.
It feels heavy. It feels forced. It feels, but it takes sometimes generations, and it takes contributions from people writing poetry and literature and works of scholarship before
and slang.
And slang.
Yep.
Before that language begins to feel like something that we're at home with. Because if you don't have that language, because, you know, when we talk about culture, when we talk about culture, a lot of people think fine arts, film, poetry, visual arts, sculpture, things of that nature. Those are certainly manifestations of culture, but language is the principal vehicle of culture. Your culture is determined by your language. The language that you, isn't it interesting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when demonstrating the fadila or the afdaliyah of Adam, he taught him the names.
Yep.
Because language, man, language is, so I think, you know, when I think about like how we understand certain things, we really need language. And it's difficult because using language that departs from what is conventional, especially when talking about controversial issues, is a minefield. It's a minefield. It's a minefield.
You know, you mentioned consciously moving in that direction. And I think that that is such an important aspect. And part of that is going to be tied to our own confidence to actually creating culture, as opposed to just being cultural consumers. And that also ties into the African-American community, because I believe that the greatest cultural creators are the African-American community in the United States. I mean,
and that's really amazing, Aki. That's really, you know, like sometimes we say that, and Ammar, this is your show. I hate to cut you off. You know what I'm saying?
No, it's all good. This is your show. This is your show.
No. I'm gonna do a Kanye joint. You know, in
I'm
honor.
gonna let you finish. I'm gonna let you finish.
I'm gonna let you finish. But Ammar AlShukry had one of the greatest podcasts of all time.
Allahu Akbar.
But no, real talk. I think
that's the Chicago in you. That's all.
Alhamdulillah, if the Chicago is in me, 𝐁𝐥𝐚𝐤𝐤, you know. But in any event, it's kind of like when we talk about African Americans being cultural creators, it is usually the case that when people are put in very difficult circumstances, they are oppressed, they are subjugated, they are exploited, they are incarcerated en masse, they are marginalized. You would see that their artistic production or their ability to produce culture would either wane because they don't have the headspace to produce beautiful culture. They're trying to survive. Or all of the culture produced will reflect the more visceral and difficult, angry aspects of that struggle. Man, we're on the same wavelength. All of the culture will reflect the anger that comes from being in that predicament.
Yeah.
And what you see with the African American culture is that, yes, there's the blues, but the blues is kind of a celebration of the tragic comic reality of the dunya. Like, the dunya makes absolutely no sense, and it is not always the place that you get vindication. It is not always a place that you get victory, but let's sing about it. Let's sing about it. Let's rhapsodize about it. Let's harmonize about it. Because we're not even upset by it. It's just the nature of the dunya. But in addition to the blues, you have music that expresses the greatest depths of joy, happiness, satisfaction, contentment, and appreciation for beauty, in spite of the fact that these people my people, we're not seeing a lot of beauty. We're not experiencing a great deal of satisfaction.
A lot of beauty.
Yeah, we're not experiencing a lot of external beauty. So there's really something to be said for that.
A beautiful definition I've heard for art is that art is the expression of beauty. It is an expression of a beauty that a person sees, or it is an expression of a beautiful emotion that a person has. And art is what makes your culture felt. Art is what makes people. So for example, the example that I like to give is Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. 2 years ago, how many years that book came out, and it was huge, right? And everyone's reading it, but it doesn't create emotion. You don't feel the prison industrial complex. And so when They See Us comes on the Central Park 5, and you are taken into those stories, and you are with them as they're being bullied and beaten by these police officers, and you see the fear, like every episode, man, breaking down and crying. Every episode, you feel art.
Of course.
Right? You feel
art.
And not to go too much into but I believe art is important as well. This is one of the manifestations that we're talking about in culture. But to bring it back to language, and to come back to this issue of confidence, a lot of times in our desire to be accepted by the broader society and kind of just jumping in with what everybody's saying, using their vernacular and using their language, we miss out on these concepts that you're talking about, how it connects to our aqeedah. And so if I could use a very popular example now, black and brown bodies, violence against black and brown bodies. We hear that a lot, but we don't believe in bodies. I'm not a body walking around, right? And these kinds of concepts were coined by individuals who are atheists, right? And so now we're absorbing atheist terminology, which is reflective of their aqeedah.
Of course.
Right? And they're inserting it into a common language, right?
Of course.
What type of effects would this have on us? And what do you suggest?
I think there's always been two approaches to that question. One is to Islamize, and this is across our history. One way of dealing with new cultural vistas is to try and Islamize them. So even though, and I'm not going to enter any controversial discussions about Aqeedah, say what we might about people like Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi and Al-Kindi, they actually saw themselves, these early falasifa, as like, we're Islamizing Aristotelian logic. We're taking it and we're making it relevant to us. Now, in terms of whether or not they actually had Iman Billah, or many people suggested that many of them did not, those early falasifa, that they actually became zanadiq, heretics. Nonetheless, this was the pursuit. The pursuit was to Islamize a foreign body of knowledge. One could certainly argue that the Ash'aris and the Maturidis were engaged in the same project. They were engaged in the same project, but with a greater level of fealty to the naql, to the transmission, right? Trying to be, but it's the same project though. It's the same project. So you do have that approach, and we see some Muslim cultural producers, academics, intellectuals, kind of taking that approach, trying to Islamize these foreign bodies of language, foreign bodies of knowledge. The other approach is to either resurrect the kind of the theological culture, if you will, of our sacred history, the Salaf.
Yeah.
To try to say, look, all of that is unnecessary. The only thing we have to do is just dig more deeply into our own language, our own implicit understandings, our own kind of organic regime of sense, right? So you've always had both of those approaches. One that tries to Islamize foreign bodies of knowledge, and one that focuses on kind of a homegrown, but still creative. Still creative. It's impossible to read Ibn Taymiyyah and not see this is an original thinker.
Yeah,
but
super creative. Yeah.
Very creative, but consciously disavowing any foreign. We don't need to lean on anything else. We don't need to lean on any other regime of sense to understand our aqa'id, to understand how we see ourselves, the world, and God. We don't have to lean on any other body of knowledge. We have enough within our own kind of received tradition to create confidently and make sense of these aqa'id. And the former approach is to try and Islamize those bodies of knowledge.
So one former is to Islamize a foreign body of knowledge, whereas the second approach is to, could I say, Anglify the Islamic body of knowledge, right? So you're trying to use it and translate it, not just translate it into English. I mean, it's a crime, for example, for our Qur'ans to still be in archaic English. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how disconnected that we're talking about, as opposed to, I mean, there's so many examples of this.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope you're enjoying the Faith While Black Conversations. It's a series sponsored by Deeper Roots, the History of Islam in Americas, taught by Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick. You can find out more about the course at www.almaghrib.online. Now back to the program.
I have a lot of pet peeves. One of them is how we're not able to translate these concepts until other people do it. The non-Muslim community does it. So, for example, we've been talking about khushu' in prayer for my whole life, khushu', and it's translated as concentration, it's translated as humility, it's translated as all of this. And then out of the blue, these dudes come in and they start doing mindfulness retreats. Mindfulness.
That's perfect example.
And then I'm like, dang, that's such a fantastic word. Like, everybody can get down. Everybody immediately understands what you mean when you say mindfulness. Yes. And it's so attractive. And I have Muslims asking me, can I go to this mindfulness retreat? I'm like, just go to the masjid, bro. That has been your mindfulness retreat forever. Sure. Or another example is asceticism, zuhd, asceticism. And now we have this huge current of minimalism. And we've been calling it asceticism for however long we've been calling it, right?
Yes, sure.
And so this just conscious usage of the power of language that's already there.
But you know what I see there is more than just the words. Mindfulness, the reason why it has a clear resonance with modern people is because we feel ghafla. See, the opposite of mindfulness is ghafla, heedlessness. And I think, whereas we would see, this is when I think about translation and I think about language, whereas we would think about the spiritual pursuit as something that begins with Allah, because that's where we start. We start with Tawheed, Wahidullah, recognize Allah in the singularity of His divinity.
Yes.
They recognize that, no, I mean, for Americans and Europeans, that's not really where they want to start. They want to start with just being a present insan. Just being an insan that is not lingering in the past, being a present human being.
It's still focused on self.
It's still focused on self. But I think that this might be something that we just might overlook, because we do have this sacred history that kind of tells us where to start. Like, you start with Allah. You start with Allah, right? But I think they're able to look and say, when people are complaining of this spiritual malaise, this void they feel, how can we, what is it that they feel? Now, of course, because they don't believe in Allah, or because they want to minimize the importance of Allah, they go straight to the human being. They're not present. They're not present. They're not present. And then this catches on. This catches on.
And so now you're making morning affirmations to yourself. I am amazing and I deserve it. And
yeah, exactly.
And you're speaking things out into the universe.
Right? Now some people, this is the two approaches. And I actually understand the utility of both. Some people will say, mindfulness, no. Tadabbur, tafakkur. I don't use, mindfulness is going to come with a whole transcendental meditation framework that's not my framework. And if somebody takes that approach, okay. Another approach is going to be, Islamic mindfulness. So you have people that are Muslims, committed, dedicated, practicing, but try to incorporate mindfulness into their very orthodox practice of the faith. So
putting Islamic at the beginning of every term, basically Islamic minimalism, Islamic mindfulness.
That's certainly a way of minimalizing it, pun intended.
Yeah.
But I think that's certainly a way of reducing it. But I think what they mean to do is, because I don't want to paint them with too broad a brush. Maybe some of them are quite critical. In fact, maybe a great many of them are quite critical. Certain aspects of, say, yoga, they might, no, I don't take that part, but I do like this part. Or no, I'm not. I don't do that. I do it like this. Or so maybe there is some syncretism. There is some merging. There is some blending. There is some mixing, and it's perhaps deeper than just putting Islamic at the front, right? But then you have people that are going to look at this and say, no. Let's go into our own tradition. We don't have to talk about mindfulness. We don't have to talk about affirmations. But
the thing is, it is in our tradition. That's the thing. Mindfulness is not just mindfulness, but minimalism, az-zuhd. That is in our tradition. But translating it into a term that when you say asceticism, nobody understands.
Yeah.
As opposed to translating it into or communicating it in a term where as soon as you say minimalism, people understand what you mean. They've got to, even if it's not perfect, even though you might need to qualify it, even zuhd, even in Arabic, you have to define it, right? You have to define it for people. When you say zahid, people don't know what that means.
And I think when you say like minimalism for zuhd, the only issue there, I guess, is that someone did it first. So that minimalism acquires its own, whereas you could have made minimalism. They
think of that Japanese lady on Netflix.
Right, Marie Kondo.
Yeah.
Right, Marie Kondo, and whereas they could have just translated zuhd, minimalism, and then they could have built the conceptual framework around minimalism. But
or have been strong enough to literally just insert zuhd into the English vocabulary.
And this is, Ammar, it's interesting, man. The conversation with you goes everywhere because you go everywhere. Sometimes I think we don't realize that English speakers are very open to accepting terms from other languages into the lexicon. These are terms that are added to the dictionary every
single day. Yeah.
Every single day. Every year that Merriam-Webster produces a new, dictionary, you have terms from other languages. You have terms that are completely invented, created. Even like limiting ourselves to just translation. No, we can just add and insert terms. Yep. So even the way so let's talk about a triumph. The word halal has gained new currency in food circles.
Yes.
People, some people say, so you guys want to do Japanese? You guys want to do Chinese? You guys want to do Thai? Or you want to do halal?
What does halal mean in Chicago? I'm very interested. What does that mean? When they say you want to do halal, what do they mean by that?
I think they mostly mean halal guys.
Okay.
They mostly mean
that's the same. Guys. That's the same in New York. When they say halal, they mean chicken and rice. That's what they mean.
Chicken and rice. The food carts.
They mean the food carts.
Right. Let's do halal. But
I have a funny anecdote about that. One time I'm on the train, I'm on the subway, and it's like a weekend night, 11:30 p.m. And this group of guys and girls get onto the train and they're drunk, red-faced, all of that. You can see it on them. And then one of them goes, "Man, I'm hungry." And the other one goes, "I really want halal right now." And then they start chanting. They're like, "We want halal. We want halal." And they're drunk. I'm like, "You guys want halal, but you're so haram right now." But yeah.
No, I mean, but they wouldn't be averse to saying halal. They wouldn't say Islamically lawful or whatever, you know. No. Halal. You can also add terms as well. And when you add terms, you can kind of control those terms much more effectively than when you're just using terms that someone else has, you know, essentially given meaning to.
Circumambulation around the Kaaba.
Right. Circumambulation. What? You know, there's certain words that when you hear a person,
it's like we might as well just go with tawaf, man. We just go with tawaf. That's easier.
There's certain words when you hear a person say them, you know they're Muslim. Like, I need to make ablution. Salam alaikum. You know what I mean? Like, circumambulation, even supplication. You know, we're making a supplication to Allah. Supplication. You know, that's one of those words that before I was Muslim, I had never heard the term supplicate. Never.
You heard pray. The only reason we use supplication is to differentiate it from salah. That's the only reason. That's the only reason.
Yeah. Right.
But that's a good point. That's another major project. How do you differentiate between salah and? But
you know what I say when I'm like speaking to non-Muslim audiences. I say prayer and ritual prayer. Prayer and ritual prayer.
Yeah. That's a good one. So we've been talking about Aqidah, and you and Dr. Sherman had a wonderful conversation about Aqidah and its practical utility. Specifically Aqidah and its practical utility. We're talking about belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, belief in His messenger, what Ahlul Sunnah all agree on, right? We're not talking about but we're talking about just, you know, belief in Arkan al-Iman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and its practical utility in our day-to-day life. And one of the things that we've been lamenting is Aqidah's gotten like this, you know, theology's gotten like a bad rap over the past 20 years. And it's to the point where you look around and you'll hardly find anybody teaching it. It went from it being something that was very energetically and passionately taught to it not being taught at all. And so how do you see that having affected the Muslim community and upcoming, you know, the Muslim youth that you're interacting with as well?
Bismillah. Well, I think, you know, the post 9/11, and it's hard to imagine. 9/11 was how many years ago, man?
20 years ago.
20 years ago. The post 9/11, I think, moment has, you know, exerted an incredible force on our communities. And it put a lens up to some of the things that we were doing. And one of the things that we saw very clearly through that lens was that all of this fruitless bickering about the Asma and the Sifat. And the reason I call it fruitless bickering is not because the conversations were not important. You know, there's perhaps nothing more important in life. The way that they were engaged with very bad adab, very bad etiquette. These conversations, these debates, they descended into petty squabbles, name calling, people
being banned from communities, people not being welcomed into communities,
people being banned from communities, you know, claiming an affiliation with a particular school of Aqidah became your entry or exit from certain communities. And we started to conduct almost like tribunals, you know, on both sides, people asking, where is Allah? What is the modality of the yad? And I think that all of this really became bitter. It really became bitter, man. I mean, in my experience, it became the debates between Ash'aris and Maturidis and Hanbalis or Salafis. Those debates became more embittered than anything I had ever seen between Sunnis and Shi'is. It became very embittered. And I think people are afraid. And then this is the thing. All of this fighting, all of this talking, right? All of this kalam. You know, a lot of people don't realize that the term kalam has in it, it's almost inherently madhmoom. It's almost inherently, it's kalam. It's talk.
Yeah, it's a lot of talk. It's talk.
Right. All of this tahadlaqa, right? This pedantry and showing off and, you know, talking about the qualities and quiddities of God and divinity and iman wasn't increased within a lot of people who engaged the dialogue. These were people that I know personally, passionately, you know, railing against the other side with regard to Aqidah. And the first time they experienced a crisis, they were back in the nightclub. They were back on the block.
So one of my mashayikh, he gave us a wonderful example on, for me at least, about the role of learning about the rulings of al-asma' wa sifat. Because what you're discussing is all of the discussion about the guidelines and the rules with regards to it, how you view the asma' wa sifat. And he said it's like a driver's manual. You learn the rules. You learn when to yield. This is a stop sign. You don't go here, and you don't run a red light. You learn what a double yellow line means. But that's not the goal. Is to drive.
Allah
and
Akbar.
driving is learning about the names of Allah, interacting with the names of Allah, not the sifat, but learning about Al-Kareem and Al-Aziz and Al-Sami'. That is where iman increases. And so when you are saying, when you immediately pointed to the notion of their iman didn't increase, that's because iman increases here, right? Not in but it is in learning about al-asma.
So when Dr. Jackson and I were talking about Aqidah, you know, a lot of people might not hear him say this because he said it almost in passing, right? He wrote a book, right? And he corrected me too, and he's my teacher. He wrote a book called Islam and the Problem of Black Suffering.
Yeah.
Right? And so he took this question. There was a doctoral candidate. I forget his name. I know his last name was Jones. But he wrote his doctoral thesis in, I want to say, the 1960s. And the doctoral thesis, this was at a seminary. It was entitled, "Is God a White Racist?" Right? Is God a white racist? Right? Of course, wa'iyadu billah, but I think the goal is provocation, right? The goal is provocation. And basically he was talking about two, in the Christian understanding of God, two sifat, saying if God is all powerful, then he must be able to stop generational chronic black suffering.
Yeah.
And if God is all loving, then he must not want generational chronic black suffering. So
which means he's unable.
Exactly. So how do you, as a you know, all of these different schools of Christian theology, how do you respond to this charge that we cannot believe in the God of the Bible as such and such in the face of generational chronic black suffering? And this guy shut the black church intellectually. He shut them down. Nobody could proffer a response. None of their theological voices could really say anything. And so what Dr. Jackson wanted to do was, he wanted to take that question, put this man in conversation with the Asharis, with Mu'tazilis and Hanbalis, saying if he posed the same question to Ash'aris, Hanbalis, and Mu'tazilis, this is how they'd
all have a response.
They'd all have a response. All of them would have a response. And this is what their responses would look like. And that's really that's what his book is about, right? Islam and the problem of black suffering. So when he was talking about Aqidah, I said, oh, kind of like your book. And he said, not like my book. I noticed that. Yeah, he said, that's not what we need, because that doesn't get to the practicality. He's saying, yeah, I was giving answers about, a
theological question.
A theological question and human suffering. We need to get Aqidah into here. You can see my chest.
Yeah.
And so I said, you're really talking about Iman.
Yeah.
You're talking about faith.
Yeah.
Right? So that when we see whatever we see, we have this internal subjectivity, even like what happened to George Floyd, even like generational black suffering, even like charges of systemic inequality. We have this internal subjectivity that we can link those things to our narrative. And even though I'm no theologian, I'm no scholar, in my limited capacity, I try to do that. And sometimes it goes well, other times it's a little clumsy. So I'll give you an example. We were talking about race and racism.
Yeah.
And I was saying that, it was the Shaytan,
yeah,
who was kind of the first creature to arrogate himself on the basis of his kind of incidental characteristic.
Yeah.
Right? And then looking at what was the spiritual root cause of Shaitan's disobedience.
Okay.
And most of the traditional scholars say it was ujb. It was ujb. It was conceit. كان معجبا بنفسه. Right? He was so pleased with himself, so impressed with himself, that he failed to comply with the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to prostrate to Adam.
Yeah.
But I raised the question, what if it was insecurity?
Okay.
What if it was through Adam's elevation, through Adam's esteem, he felt that he was being displaced. He felt that his position of honor was somehow being eroded, somehow being taken from him. If that is true, that gives us a very profound lens through which we see
white supremacy.
White supremacy. It's a form of insecurity. And the cure for insecurity is having a better opinion of Allah. Husnul dhan billah, that Allah has enough fadl, Allah has enough favor to give. Remember the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, in the hadith al-sahih, if all of the human beings and all of the jinn were to ask Allah for everything they wanted, and Allah granted them that all at the same time, it would not diminish what Allah has in the least. So if you think someone else has to be subjugated in order for you to be elevated, or someone else has to be marginalized in order for you to be centered, or someone has to be exploited in order for you to experience abundance, لا يقدرون الله حق قدره.
That's what hasad is. Hasad is tamanni zawal al-ni'ma. You want someone's blessings to be taken, and it's not that you want to have it too. It's that you want their blessing to be removed. And Ibn al-Qayyim, he remembers that he mentions that the one who has hasad has waged war against Allah in like 8 different ways. But undoubtedly, one of the ways that you're describing here is that notion of feeling like the resources of Allah are limited, and so them having is you not having, as opposed to you just expecting
that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give all of you from his bounty.
See, and so, but what I'm saying is that how many people, especially folks that want to engage the issue of race. Now, look, we're just offering some ideas. This is Ammar AlShukry, this is Ubaydullah Evans. And I haven't written anything formally. But even the fact that we believe that our tradition perhaps can offer some unique insights, that says a lot, man. That we think, you know, like that we're willing to think creatively about our stories, our leitmotifs, our tradition, our ritual practices.
Okay, now you are completely invested in increasing Muslim literacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And literacy of our tradition as well as literacy of, I'm assuming you have some secular books and Western resources as well.
Sure,
that people.
Sure.
Do you feel that people are focusing too much on the secular as as a platform, as something that they are seeking truth from, and they are not quite confident in searching our tradition actually for these solutions?
I think what ends up happening, I mean, education is more than just, it's more than
being able to regurgitate.
There you go. And it's more than just tanawul al-ilm. It's not just kind of taking in knowledge.
Yeah.
Education is also about a certain calibration, a certain sensitivity. You see, it's almost like anyone that is deeply rooted, steeped in the Islamic tradition, even if they're open-minded and they are creative and they engage in kind of free-thinking activity, if you're connected to deen, you have a certain suspicion about innovation.
Of course.
You have a certain suspicion about newfangled ideas. That's not an ideological commitment. That's a sensibility.
Beware of having a position that nobody ever preceded you in. Right. These are concepts that we.
Right. But it's a concept, but it's like it's a sensibility. It's like, ooh, I can't even articulate why this is making me uncomfortable, but it's making me uncomfortable. Right. What people don't realize is that every system of education produces that kind of calibration. So if you have a high level Western education in the secular academy,
yeah,
you also develop a very particular kind of calibration so that when you say the word justice, when you talk about equity, when you talk about concepts like mattering, like the term Black Lives Matter, it's on the one hand, and by the way, I'm not criticizing that organization. I just don't think this
Feel
is
free
the time.
to. We're good to go. No problem.
No, but I don't think this is the right time. I think there's definitely a critical piece, but I don't think this is the right. I don't think this is the right.
That's fine. I'm just being instigator. That's all.
Right. I don't think this is the right time.
No
right
problem.
Now, they're raising their voices. They're doing important work. Let's get behind them in as much as we can. Right. But
Inshallah.
That language carries in it just the term itself, Black Lives Matter. It carries with it certain implications, man.
Like?
Like that, on the one hand, if I were to engage in, I'll engage in both kinds of activity, right? If I'm Islamizing that idea, right? I would say, لَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. It's just saying that all human beings, and especially those that have been marginalized, those who, we have not recognized kind of the fullness of their humanity, they are completely and fully ennobled in their humanity, right? And that would be a way of kind of like, okay, I'm trying to understand this through an Islamic framework. Okay. If I were to look at it from a more critical framework, we would say that, yes, existence and the nobility of being human is something taken for granted. Something like, yes, but the emphasis is never placed on mattering. The emphasis is placed on ihsan, conduct, taqwa. What does it, meaning like the emphasis is not merely on esteem for the fact that you exist. The emphasis is on esteem for the fact that you exist righteously. It's not just esteem for, I exist. No, it's I exist in a God-pleasing way. And this is what gives
what we should be pushing people to, and that is what we should be putting in our effort.
But I will say, if someone isn't being treated like they matter at all, maybe getting them to understand the nobility of being a human being is a precursor to getting them to understand the responsibility of being a human being. Because when we talk about La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, we're talking about that's the responsibility of being human.
But that's the missing puzzle piece that the entire world, and definitely our country, is waiting on the Muslims to show up, because we've got the puzzle piece in our pocket and we're walking around watching everybody look for this puzzle piece, and we're not pulling it out of our pocket, right? And so even when we are chanting Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, if all we do is regurgitate other people's talking points and we stop where their ilm stopped, when we have that which will continue, not just Black Lives Matter, but for us, it is, as you're articulating, that Black souls matter, right? The Prophet ﷺ was not sent to save Black lives, but he was sent to save the souls of all of mankind, including their life in the dunya.
And I think Ammar, to your point, man, I think, yes, and see, this is another thing, man. You're gonna get me. I said this wasn't the time. You're gonna get me in some trouble. I think we have to also be very careful of crafting a discourse that only seeks to open psychological space among the oppressors. Because when you're saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, you're essentially saying to the oppressive power structure, you are wrong because Black Lives Matter. You are wrong because Black Lives Matter. Now, I understand why that is necessary, but I really hope that you give people a sense of their own agency, that you can do that. And also, look, Allah is over these people. Don't just craft a language that appeals to them to repudiate racism so that your condition can be rectified. No, we have to also teach people a language to appeal to Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that their condition can be rectified. You see? And of course, you don't have to say to Allah, Black Lives Matter. That's not a language that you would use to appeal to God to rectify your
What you say to Allah is inni maghlubun fantasir.
That's what you say to Allah, right?
Yeah.
I am overcome. Help me. Help me. That's a different, it's like the point of the khitab is different. Now, I've written in the past about being able to speak with both tongues. See, when we're talking to the oppressive power structure, yes, I think we have to use a language that resonates with them. I mean, and I think that there's precedent for that in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. When the Prophet is addressing Quraysh, right? I mean, one of the, Ibn Taymiyyah has written beautifully about Surah Quraysh, Quraysh. لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ, and saying that for people that are experiencing privilege, abundance, it is not the best and wisest approach to tell them your abundance is nothing. The wisest approach is to say your abundance is not from yourself. Your abundance is from Allah, right? Your ability to be safe, your ability to enjoy trade caravans in the summer and the winter, it comes from Allah. So worship the Lord of this house, right? You have been made the custodians of this house. Worship the Lord of this house, right? This is, and if you worship the Lord of this house, naturally you have to repudiate injustice. You have to disavow.
And Quraysh was privileged. I mean, they were privileged over all of the other Arabs.
You're right. This is so you have to speak in a language that resonates with them. Maybe the framework of critical theory offers that, and Black Lives Matter is very much kind of grows out of that framework, kind of critical race theory. Maybe this is a language we can use to open some.
Can you explain
space.
Critical race theory for those who don't understand what that terminology means?
Critical race theory was it's actually illegal. It's taken on various and sundry kind of manifestations, but it's a way of after the end of segregation, right? The end of when schools were desegregated,
which is not that long ago.
Not that long ago. There was a legal scholar who employed certain elements of Marxist thought to explain how, in spite of desegregation, things were still grossly unequal.
Yeah.
Right, and that's really, critical race theory is just a way of explaining that. It's a way of explaining these kinds of inequalities. Some of these inequalities are discursive, right? The things that we say, things that we write, things that we read, ways that we understand. Some of them are physical, with regard to wealth and privilege and standing. But it's an amazingly useful tool. My point is that the mukhatab of the tool is the dominant culture. You're trying to talk to them about what they're doing in hope that they would recognize the unfairness of what they're doing and stop. You can't only give people that tool. I'm not, me as a free, God-worshiping Black man, that's not the only tool I want. Just a tool to help me kind of open some psychological space, among the dominant culture. What about if they never listen? What if they never repudiate their racism? What if they never? What is the discourse? What is the language? What are the spiritual technologies, to use a complex term, that I can use to still live my life with sanity, with clarity, with dignity, above appealing to them about anything, right? It is our responsibility to give people that language. See, critical theory is not going to give them that language.
And that's Iman.
Iman will give them, Iman gives you that. And so sometimes,
the first generation of Bani Israel in Egypt, right? I mean, from the time that they were enslaved until Musa alayhi salam takes them out, what do they have to hold on to, right? The destiny of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not that they're going to emerge, no matter how hard they pray at that point in time, right? First generation that came to the United States. I mean, this is something that was written and it will play out. That being said, one of those eye-opening moments that I mentioned, Dr. Jackson had mentioned in that interview is, I've read so many times that ulama, they talk about from the Nasr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-thabat ala al-mabda, right? It is that a person is steadfast upon their principles,
that in and of itself is victory from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
No
you are
doubt
able
about
to
it.
be steadfast. And so he articulated it in the most simple way, where he said sometimes the support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not come out here, but the support of Allah comes here. And that the support of Allah comes just to you, in that you are able to be steadfast and you are able to be principled and you are able to hold on until your eventual destiny, which is worship the Lord until death comes to you.
See these kinds of understandings, they have their expression in Christianity. So people would say that's a pie in the sky. You know, we need justice now. We're not waiting for heaven. We're not, and it's almost like, and this is a place, you know, I don't want to get in any trouble. I don't want to get in any trouble. But one of the things that we don't realize, I don't want to get in any trouble. But one of the things that we don't realize that I think is perhaps our greatest asset when talking about those kinds of deep and penetrating faith-based understandings is that my Prophet alayhi wasallam was also a mujahid.
Yeah.
So this for us, the willingness to physically sacrifice goes hand in hand with this kind of, you know, a-thabat al-mabda.
And so what I was going to say about the, you know, it being a Christian concept is that is not to pacify, but it is to give steadfastness as you engage, as you work to change. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, and I think that for us, it's almost like those concepts for us are seamless. Like that is the gift of the sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's seamless. We don't even think about patience and apathy as having anything in common, right? We don't even think about like patience and appeasing oppressors as having anything in common, because the Prophet ﷺ encouraged patience, but he never appeased oppressors.
Yeah.
You see? So where is that in the discourse? It's not there. Hold on one second. You know, I'm gonna have to jump off in about 15 minutes, bro.
Okay, so let's knock out
Hold on
the
one
other
sec.
8.
Bismillah.
We got through 25% of the questions I had for you.
Oh my God.
We ended up talking about nothing out. I'm kidding. But alhamdulillah, it was good. It's great.
Bismillah.
So I wanted to talk to you. We didn't get to talk about, we're talking about the broader community. We're talking about the broader country a lot. But something that we're also going to have to rectify and resolve and engage in is within our Muslim communities, right? Within our Muslim institutions, within our masajid, within our Islamic schools. You know, I had an experience maybe a year or two ago. I had an uncle of mine, Sudanese, very close to me. And his son was 12 years old and he wanted to memorize Quran. So he called me up and he said, you know, I'm willing to send him anywhere in the US. Anywhere in the US, let me send him to a Quran school and stuff like that. And I asked around and I couldn't resolve where I could send him, where I didn't feel like he would end up hating like his experience, you know, being a black kid. And so when we talk about Islam and resolving racism within our communities, you being a black man, Chicago convert, when I think of Chicago, I think of Indians, Palestinians, and African Americans. Did you feel difficulty in navigating through those communities, as well as overseas? And what was the difference, if there was a difference, between your experience within the United States and overseas as well?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You know, I did. I mean, I have experienced indignities, man, at the hands of Muslims, unfortunately, man.
More than at the hands of non-Muslims.
More than at the hands of non-Muslims, certainly. You know, in terms of, you know, sometimes, and that's something that I really appreciate about where our community is. You know, it would be too easy just to talk about, you know, police brutality and mass incarceration and poorly funded public schools and wealth disparity and not talk about
us.
And not talk about us. You see, because those are kind of the larger manifestations of systemic racism. I certainly live with those, but in terms of interpersonal, personal racism, I've experienced much more of that at the hands of Muslims than even white folks. Right? And certainly not at the hands of white Muslims. Yeah. I've never, in fact, I don't think I have ever experienced anything like that at the hand of a white Muslim, ever. Right? But I certainly have, but I don't think it affected me in the same way that it affected some people. You know, I think that my mother did a very good job of instilling a lot of, you know, pride as an izzah, not pride as in kibr, you know, in her children. So I never, you know, it's almost like, you know, you know, and I'm not boasting, but there was a certain kind of validation that I never sought from non-Black Muslims. I never, you know, which was actually one of the reasons why I wanted to study Islam, because I wasn't seeking from them, you know, and this might be from kibr and not izzah. You know, I even before I was Muslim, I deemed myself intelligent. You know, I deemed myself well-read and informed. You know, I deemed myself intelligent. So I never experienced their mistreatment of me as something that was an indictment of the tradition or something that, you know, made me rethink being Muslim, or it just made me say, what stupid backwards people. Right? It just made me say, what for them to hold a belief like that about Black people, for them to have such an inadequate view of Black people, or for them to be as accomplished and educated as this community is, to hold such trite, insipid stereotypes about Black people, that is so disappointing, man. You know, and before all of this, before hearing you say that, I would have considered you a fine man. I would have considered you a really decent person, but you spoke and you exposed yourself to be an utter fool to me. You know,
but it did cut deep. Then, if you're gonna, you know, basically cancel this person, then that's a pretty deep wound.
No. In the sense that I felt it that deeply, yes, it did cut deep. It did cut deep. It did not result in a feeling of personal diminishment. I didn't feel personally diminished, right?
What was this spoken to you, like at you, or about Black people in your presence?
I've seen, you know, most of what I've seen, you know, of course, I mean, being an Arabic speaker, I've heard Abid, you know, I've heard that. And
you're not considered amongst them.
Right. You know what I'm saying? I've heard that, right? And we don't mean, you know, na'ni ibadallah. And,
kullana ibadallah.
Kullana ibadallah. And, you know, I'm familiar with that. I've heard, but most of what I've seen hasn't been of that particular genre. It hasn't been like slurs, and I've heard that stuff. Most of what I've heard most of what I've experienced, witnessed, what I've felt has been the expression of very deep misgivings or assumptions about me and about black Muslims, about black people. You know what I'm saying? So almost like, once, when I think about this, man, this is just funny, but it's not funny. Once I was in a predominantly Palestinian, Egyptian, Lebanese neighborhood, and we were playing basketball. Me and maybe 4 or 5 other. Me and maybe 4 or 5 other Black American brothers. We're playing basketball. And an older guy, I mean, Ammar, I can't make this up. The game, the game was, we were in between games. And the Black American brothers were sitting on the sideline in close proximity. It wasn't like we were like a group within a group. We were all playing basketball together, but we're sitting on the sideline in close proximity. He comes over to us and he says, guys, I need you guys to come with me. I have some things in my office. I need them moved to another location. We looked around like, do we have movers on our shirts or something like that? Or maybe does somebody have a van outside that says Black-owned moving company or something? Then he said this, and then he walked away.
Like follow me. Wow.
Now look, when we didn't move, he turned around and said, guys, I'm gonna give you money.
Oh, come on. You're like, okay, let me grab my hat. You got $10 for me? MashaAllah.
Guys, I'm gonna give you money. And we were just like, what would give you the impression that I'm interested in moving something from your office for money? What would give it stuff like that? You know what I'm saying? Like what? You know, that really happened. You know what I'm saying? Or or even just like the use of black and miskin and less fortunate just synonymously. Just it's just like it's mostly certain assumptions, or the Hafidh of Quran that is reciting in Qalun is being corrected on his qira'ah. Right? We don't know. And he's like, I'm reciting in Qalun. Are you familiar with that qira'ah? What is Qalun? You know what I'm saying? What is Qalun? Oh, okay. I mean, it's like
to be fair, I had that experience as well. I had a friend of mine, one of my dear friends I met as a teenager. He was Albanian, white. So it was a complete opposite experience. I know you got to go, but he was quoting to me, because he was Albanian. He, of course, Sheikh Al-Albani, right? Sheikh Al-Albani was his guy.
Of course.
And he was the first person to tell me Sheikh bin Baz. And I never heard that name before, Sheikh bin Baz.
Abdullah bin Baz.
I never heard of him. So I thought I'm like, oh, it's so cute. This young brother's trying to say Ibn Abbas. I was like, no. Listen, I'm like being really, patronizing. I'm like, you mean Ibn Abbas. And he's like, what? No, I don't mean the cousin of the Prophet. No, I mean Abdul Aziz bin Baz. Like, I was like, I don't know. So sometimes, I see that for sure.
So those kinds of assumptions, assumptions of criminality. Something comes up. A brother lost his phone in the masjid. The khatib lost his phone in the masjid. There was one African American brother there who had just embraced Islam, and he was clearly like on the streets. He was clearly on the streets. He had just stumbled into the masjid. Clearly there was, you could see on him the traces of, to phrase it indelicately, vagrancy. This is a brother on the street, man. I'm trying to figure,
Yeah.
you know. But he stayed with them. He ate with them. He embraced Islam after they gave him da'wah. He embraced Islam. Someone's phone was misplaced. They immediately started threatening to call the police. We will call the police. We will. You need to get that phone, and you came in here. Somebody said they looked all over for it. It's inside the minbar.
Wow. That's horrible.
I wasn't there. They called me to atone, and this is where you see the like riqqatul qalb. That's a part of the Muslim character. All of them in tears. Ubayd, how do we? When they found, he was so worried that they would call the police. He didn't leave until they found the phone.
Wow.
When they found the phone, he stormed out. They're calling me as they're walking after him, trying to apologize. Can you talk to him? What should we do? This is terrible. I can hear them weeping. SubhanAllah.
I hope that brother, that it didn't break him. That's what I hope.
You know, I would often ask, did you guys ever see him again? They say never. 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 You know, never. And it's like, it's that inability to see someone that, yeah, he's hungry, but he stayed listening to you talk about Deen for 2 hours after he ate. If he was just there for food and stealing, he already ate.
I wish we could, unfortunately, we can only see people where we're at. We have no idea about distance traveled. We only see where they're at. But that Hafiz kid that everybody loves, he might have not traveled far in his journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Right? He might have been right there.
His parents, he started at, right here, and his parents lifted him up to here. Hip program as a kid, all of that type of stuff. Then you got that brother coming in with the tattoos and just signs of vagrancy, as you pull it. And his journey, he journeyed halfway across the world, right? He journeyed from the earth to the heavens.
Just to get to La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, do you know where I came from, young man? Do you have any idea? Do you have any idea, the stuff that you hear about in movies? My transformation has been like that. But then sometimes even assuming that, I had a friend, and honestly, Ammar, we've been talking about Islamic frameworks. I think that most of our issues, we need workshops and we need conferences and we need lectures. But you know what I think we need more than anything?
Friends.
Ta'aruf. Li ta'arufu. We need ta'aruf. More than, it's almost like, there was a brother, excellent Muslim, alhamdulillah, from what I know of him. Great brother from what I know of him, alhamdulillah. This one Arab brother asked him if he could come and talk to some of the youth at a masjid youth group or something about Islam. And the brother had some training in Syria and, spoke Arabic very well. And the brother said, yeah, sure, I'll come talk to the youth, why not? The guy starts introducing him. He says, you guys listen up. This guy knows where you're coming from. And he knows Islam.
Okay.
Yeah. He used to be a gangbanger.
Wow.
And the brother was like, before Islam, the most serious thing in my life was tennis. It's like, before Islam, I was actually
a tennis player?
I was a very distinguished tennis player in the city of Chicago. That's what I was never a gangbanger. But
he was Carlton Banks. You brought him to the masjid.
Carlton Banks. Hence my cable knit V-neck sweater. He was Carlton Banks. But if there's no ta'aruf, then maybe you don't know that when you talk about black people, it's not these limited categories that you've seen on movies and in songs. You know, some people in the black community play tennis, and some people cook, and some people are entrepreneurs, and some people are wealthy, and some people are poor, and some people drink, and some people counsel recovering alcoholics. And some people, it's almost like it's subhanAllah, man.
It's not a monolith at all. Yes.
Yeah, we need some ta'aruf, man. We need some ta'aruf. But I have to jump off. I have to jump on this other call, inshallah.
It's a pleasure. Jazakallah khair. I appreciate you spending all this time with me. Last question. Number one is, where are you at on social media? That's number one.
Nowhere. I'm not on social media at all. Now I have a business. I have a business called
Atiq.
Atiq, ATIQ Woodworks. You know, we do, mashallah, we do custom woodwork. You know, stuff like this. Cabinets, doors,
mashallah,
shelves. We do custom woodwork. Our workshop is in Fas.
Do you ship?
Of course we ship. The workshop is in Fas. You know, most of our clients.
I thought you were doing that in your garage.
No.
One of those.
No. The workshop is in Fas. So you can find my business page, Atiq, ATIQ Woodworks. You know, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter as well.
Get you some fine Moroccan woodwork, inshallah.
Well, you know, Moroccan is only the point of departure. It's a fusion. We're doing all sorts of stuff.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless and accept and increase, inshallah. Number two, the Alln program. Tell us about the intensive that's happening soon.
The virtual program is something I'd like to see people sign up for. This, you know, what we always mix, you know, core Islamic subjects and topics of contemporary relevance. We have everybody from Ustadh Zainab Ansari, Dr. Jonathan Brown, Dr. Sherman Jackson, Dr. Munir Fareed, Sheikh Ali Suleiman Ali, Dr. Hadi Mubarak.
I love Sheikh Ali Suleiman Ali, man. I love all of them. Sheikh Ali is my guy.
Yeah, he's if you don't love Sheikh Ali Suleiman Ali, something is wrong, man.
Yeah, man, mashallah. University of Michigan, PhD in Islamic Studies, counselor, psychologist.
Of course, you know,
mashallah.
Of course.
Dr. Ubaydullah Anjum as well.
Dr. Ubaydullah Anjum, beautiful and very profound scholar. Look for us on AlMprogram.org. That's where you can sign up, inshallah.
ALIM.
Program. ALIMprogram.org. Inshallah. So,
Jazakallah khair.
Alhamdulillah. We'll be in touch, inshallah.
Inshallah. Allah wa fiqh.